What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is yet another companion build for you guys to play with, or at least to try out for yourself. As you see right in front of you, this one in particular is for Mirri, who I have called the Assassin for this specific build. The reason why I called it the Assassin is because she likes to run around with little dual-wielding daggers, so it ended up being a pretty fun and yet exciting build. Keep in mind that close-range DPS builds are, for lack of better words, not optimal, seeing as they take a lot of damage and survivability becomes pretty difficult for a companion that are up close. So for the most part, being ranged like a bow or any kind of, staff would probably be optimal. But in this case, having a companion that is up close and personal ends up being pretty decent, because the way these builds are, in my opinion, I think are as an addition to things as like tanks and things like that, where they don't really take out a lot of damage, but at the same time you can add on a little bit of extra damage from a companion. That way you can keep all the aggro and yet still be able to put down a little bit of damage and help clear out some mobs and things of that nature. So for that purpose, these builds do come in clutch quite often, but I'll get into that in 1 second. I do want to say really fast that I do have a Let's Play playlist on my Let's Play channel. If you guys are interested in that, a link to that channel will be in the description down below for those of you guys who are into that kind of content. While you're there, if you're not already subscribed, definitely do me a huge favor and subscribe to the channel, because it really does help that channel grow. But with that being said, I'm ready to jump into this build. If you guys are excited, do me a huge favor, drop a like on this video. Also subscribe to this channel if you're not already subscribed, because it really does help this channel grow. So with that being said, let's jump into this build. Alright, so right off the bat, as you guys can see in my number 1 bar, I have Razor Cape. The reason why I have Razor Cape is because this is a damage reduction tool for Mirri, and that is ultimately the biggest thing, the biggest reason, if you will, on why I have this here. Is like I said before in the intro of this video, companions that are up close and personal end up taking too much damage, and survivability becomes an issue regardless of the companion, regardless of the build. It just becomes a lot harder to stay alive for a companion up close and personal, so anything that could reduce damage would probably be pretty optimal. But of course, you don't want to fill your entire bar with it, seeing as damage is the name of the game for a damage dealer, right? So what this does is that she envelops, or the companion envelops themselves in a ring of floating razors, dealing 1,933 physical damage to nearby enemies every 2 seconds for 8 seconds. That's not the real important part about this. It does do a little bit of damage over time, but again, that's not why we're here. The more important part of this is the razors also shield from attacks, reducing their damage taken by 20%. That is the important part, in my opinion, for this specific skill. The added damage over the 8 seconds, every 2 seconds for 8 seconds, is just an added benefit of this skill, which I think really does help in the damage department. So it ends up being a pretty decent skill overall, especially since we're dual wielding daggers. It ends up helping a lot in that department. So moving on, Swift Assault. The regular version of this is one of my favorite abilities in the game, or skills in the game, just because it's a lot of fun to use in my personal opinion. So of course, naturally, it is only, I guess it's only natural that I was going to put it into my bar for a dual wielding companion such as Mirri, right? So what this does is that the companion floods an enemy with steel, battering themselves with 5 consecutive attacks that deal 1,933 physical damage. So basically 1,933 times 5 is what this ends up being. And of course the cooldown is at 8 seconds. So it ends up being used quite often. And because of that, it ends up being a pretty good skill all the way around. I think personally, this is a good skill. Moving on, it's a very simple skill. All it does is basically that attack 5 times, and that's basically about it, but it looks really cool nonetheless. So moving on, Ghostly Evasion. This is a very important skill for this specific build, because what happens is that Mirri surrounds herself in a phantasmic aura, dodging the next attack made against them, while also reducing their damage by 20%. So not only do you dodge and negate basically the next attack of the enemy she's dueling up against, but on top of that, you also get another damage reduction of 20% for 8 seconds. So between this and this, you have an added benefit of 40% damage reduction for a period of 8 seconds. It ends up being a pretty good skill overall. And they're both at a cooldown of 12 seconds, so it ends up being used consecutively quite often, and more often than not. It's, again, these are very simple skills on this build, but it ends up being pretty imperative to say the least. So this is 100% a defensive skill to have on this bar. Slayer's Blade, as your skill, if you're a Nightblade, Killer's Blade, or the other morph, it's an execute, right? So of course it's going to be the same thing for this specific build. So Mirri thrusts a magic blade with lethal precision to finish off an enemy, dealing 29,995 magic damage. And of course, since it is an execute, she only uses it when the enemy is below 25% health. This ends up being a pretty powerful skill nonetheless, and she does use it. However, it is important to keep in mind that since it is technically an execute, she will not use this during regular battle against the boss, right? So if you're fighting a very tanky boss, for example, for the majority of the fight, she's not going to be used this. Where this ability comes in clutch is some of like the lower bosses and stuff, where it's like maybe around 100,000 health, or something like that, you know, where she would probably be using it more frequently, seeing as most world bosses have a lot of health, and the amount of damage companions do isn't enough to get them down to the 25% range really fast. So because of that, this is specifically for lower end enemies, to say the least, because bosses, you won't see this being used very much, and because of that, it will hurt in the DPS department a little bit. If that's the case, you can switch it for something like Shadow Slash, that it basically just slashes an enemy, dealing 9,665 magic damage and setting them off balance for 7 seconds. This ability, in my opinion, again, this is a flex bot, and I would put this in its place. Mainly because it does 2 things for you. Not only does it deal 9,665 damage upfront magic damage, but it also sets them off balance, allowing you to potentially get more resources back because of it. So I will be using Slayer's Blade when we go fight the world boss. So we will be taking a slight hit in the damage department. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna. So we'll be taking a little bit of damage in the damage department, but it ends up being okay nonetheless. And last but not least, for the regular bar, we have Life Absorption. Life Absorption is from the Soul Thief line. Normally I run Blood Transfusion because this heals you instead of the companion, and it ends up being good. Really good, but we needed something that's gonna potentially help with the survivability of Mirri as well. So Life Absorption was really the only thing that was going to fit that spot, in my opinion. And what it does is that Mirri steals an enemy's life force, dealing 4,832 magic damage and healing themselves or an ally around them for 7,817 health. So not only does it do upfront damage at 4,832 damage, magic damage that is, but it also heals either you or her, depending on who needs it the most. it ends up being a pretty decent heal overall. The only downside that I see is the fact that it is a 12-second heal, or excuse me, a 12-second cooldown. And because of that, she tends to not use it as much as I wish she could have. I wish this skill was the equivalent of Bastion's Kindle, because if it was the equivalent in terms of Bastion's Kindle, it would have been a fantastic skill. Like, hands down, a perfect skill if that, if anything. But because it's 12 seconds, it's not a huge deal. But again, she ends up healing not as much as I wish she could have. But still, regardless, this is, in my opinion, the best option we have to fit this spot. But yeah, last but not least is the ultimate. The ultimate is one of the best ultimates in the game for companions, in my personal opinion. It's called Impeccable Shot. What it does is that Mirri marks an enemy and exposes their weakness, causing them to take 20% more damage for 3 seconds. While the enemy is exposed, they build up to a killing shot, unleashing a massive bolt that deals 28,995 physical damage. This does a massive 28,995 physical damage just by the ability by itself. But where this ability really shines is if you're in a group, or if you're a DPS character yourself and you're light attack weaving and you're really good at the whole rotation of your build. And in those 3 seconds, the enemy who is marked by this shot takes an additional 20% more damage. So every single thing that you, Mirri, and any other player that's in your group, or perhaps even in the vicinity, I don't know if it affects people that are not in a group with you, but regardless, if it does, that's even better. But this ability ends up really amplifying the damage of that you can do, or the damage output between you and your team, by 20%. It is a significant jump. Granted, it's only 3 seconds, so if you can predict when this is going to happen, or if you have it set to manual and you can let everybody know the second it's about to go active and everyone can unload at the same time, this ends up being an insane increase of damage. So needless to say, fantastic skill, or ultimate to say the least. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into our outfit sets. I say this in every single one of my videos, guys, and I'm going to say it again in this one. But I like to emulate my companion builds in the same fashion that I do, or anybody else does with their typical builds, right? It's typical 2 5-piece sets and a 2-piece monster set. Mythics aren't applicable here because there's nothing to the equivalent of that for a companion. So I go by 5-2-2. So for the first set is the 5 body pieces, which is going to be aggressive. This really does help in amplifying the damage output of Mirri and your skills, and her skills, because what it does is that it increases the damage done by 1.7% per item piece that you have equipped of course, that's if it's all purpled out, because it's less depending on the color, of course. But if it's all purpled out, it ends up being 1.7% more damage additionally per piece that you have on Mirri. This is so important that I even have it on the 2-piece, shoulders, and head. Oh, by the way, all of these are medium. Well, actually, this is, the 2-piece is a focus set to increase critical strike rating by 569 per piece, right? So you have a 5-piece aggressive and a 2-piece, focus set, increasing critical strike, rating by 569. This isn't a lot, but it does help nonetheless. But I kind of gave spoilers already accidentally. But the last 5-piece set is, of course, the jewelry and the weapons, which are all also aggressive. So you have all of this being aggressive and a 2-piece critical or focus, increasing your critical rating. And it ends up being pretty efficient nonetheless. She ends up doing a pretty decent amount of damage, considering the fact that it's a companion, and companions only do 7 to 10 K DPS. So don't expect fantastic numbers from a companion. So what we're trying to do is maximize the effectiveness of said abilities, and I think this really does it. An alternative to this is just running all aggressive. All aggressive tends to be pretty effective as well, but of course I like a little variation in my builds. So in this case, I added the focused set. So let's go ahead and check out Mirri's fashion. Alright guys, in terms of Mirri's fashion, she is wearing a costume, and that is the I can't pronounce that, Naryu's Morag Tong costume. In terms of dyes, she is wearing the Cold Harbor Ash Black, Obsidian Black, and Sergeant's Charcoal. And I think it looks mighty fantastic to say the least. In terms of the daggers, it's basically the same thing. Don't mind the actual outfit. You could just ignore that. I have that just to complete the outfit. But I have both daggers in Dark Elf Dagger 3. And the dyes are exactly the same in each dagger, which is Cold Harbor Ash Black, Obsidian Black, and Sergeant's Charcoal. So with that being said, let's go ahead and see if we can get a world boss without having any interruptions. So there you have it, guys. At the end, we ended up using the Killer's Blade for Mirri, and it did show a little downside in the DPS department, but at the end, you could actually see her using the Killer's Blade, and that is ultimately what I wanted to do. If you wanted to increase the DPS substantially, then you would swap out that skill, as I said in the video itself. But overall, the build worked exactly as intended, and even when we were fighting the world boss, it was pretty interesting because we actually had a few spectators. I had to let them know that I was recording a video, of course, but once they knew that I was recording a video, they just stood on the sidelines and watched as Mirri took care of business. It was pretty fun, to say the least. But if you enjoyed this video, guys, do me a huge favor, drop a like on this video. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, because it really does help this channel grow. So with that being said, catch you guys in the next one. Deuces.